In this tutorial, we will learn how to merge data horizontally in R. And so to get started, we need to have two data files that we can read into R. And in this case, we're going to read in .csv or comma-separated data files, which happen to be the file format for these two files here. So the two toy data sets that we're going to be working with here are called personal data and performance data. And note it's personal data with a capital P and a capital D, and performance data with a capital P and a capital D. Neither file name has any spaces in it. So we're going to read in these two data files here. They're fairly intuitive in terms of what they include as far as the data go. The first one, the personal data frame, includes personal data or employee demographic data. And then the second data frame includes performance data, in this case, performance data across 4 different quarters within a year for employees. And so we're going to be merging these two data files horizontally in R by a key variable. And in this case, the key variable is the common variable with unique identifiers in it across both of these data files, which is the ID variable or field. So the key variable here, again, is the ID variable or field. And you can see that appears in both of these data files here. And so we will be doing a horizontal merge, which means that we're going to be bringing these together horizontally so that we'll be combining all the variables together and including the ID variable. So we will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different variables in our final merge data frame that we create in R. Note that the ID variable is common between both of these, so that doesn't get a double count here as I was counting those out. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is make sure that these two data files are saved into a folder that we can subsequently set as our working directory. And so in this case, my R workshop folder, which is within my H drive, so it's my H drive R workshop folder, has both of these files saved into it. And as you can see here, they're both comma-separated values files, which is where the .csv comes from. So next, we will open up our RStudio session here. And as you can see, we have our console window. We can clear out the contents here if we'd like by going to Edit, Clear Console. Then the next thing we'll do is go to File, New File, RScript. So again, that's File, New File, RScript to open up an RScript editor window so that we can track our work. I'm going to use hashtag annotations here to make a note first that we are going to merge data horizontally in R. And we're going to be using the merge function today. And this is a function that comes from base R, which means we do not need to install a special package to access this function. It's a great function to learn how to do horizontal merges with. And sometimes you'll hear horizontal merges referred to as joins. And that's another way you can talk about them as well, a horizontal join, for example. So that means we're going to be horizontally bringing two data frames together and matching the cases across the two data frames using some kind of key variable, which I mentioned before happens to be called ID here. It's the unique employee identifier neighbor, identify variable that's common to both of the data files we're working with. Okay, so first I'm going to move through these steps relatively quickly as these are covered in other tutorials. We're going to set our working directory. So again, working directory is just simply the directory or the folder where we have saved our data files. It just makes it a little bit easier to read in the data. And I happen to know off the top of my head, it is setwd. I've saved those files into my H drive, our workshop folder. I know that off the top of my head. You may not know that. And almost certainly you're going to be referencing a different drive and a different folder, a different path that you'll need to set as your working directory. But we're using the setwd function here. I'm clicking run. You could alternatively go to session, set working directory, and choose directory. If you'd like to use drop-down menus to find the folder where you have saved those two .csv files, and then you can click open here, and that gets you to the same place. Just make sure that you copy and paste that code into your R script so you can make it more reproducible. So each time you open up a new session, you can access and set that working directory with greater facility. So now let's read in the data files. And we're going to be using the read.csv functions. If you need a tutorial on those, then feel free to check out another video I have where I show you how to read in data using the read.csv function from base R. And so we're going to need to come up with some unique object names for the data frames that we're going to assign to these objects so we can subsequently reference them in our merge function. And I'm going to call the first object personal data. This is just what I think makes sense because the file contains personal data for employees. You could call whatever you put to the left side of this arrow, you could name it whatever you want as long as it doesn't start with a numeral or a special character like a dash. And then we use the read.csv function from baseR as a sole parenthetical argument, meaning within the parentheses here and within the quotation marks, in the special case of the read.csv function, put the exact name of the data file, which is personal data with a capital P and a capital D, no space. The exact name of it as it appears in your working directory folder. So there it is there. In fact, if I want to be sure, I can copy that and just paste it in. Just make sure that you add on the .csv extension to tell the function that this is in fact a comma-separated values file that we're reading in here. Okay, so let's read in that first data frame object. As you can see here, if we click, we've already seen what that looks like by opening this .csv in Excel, and now we've got an object containing those data with 5 variables, which are ID, last name, first name, start date, and gender, and 8 observations, so 8 rows or cases of unique data here. In this case, it's the employee personal data, hence why I gave it that name. Now to expedite things, I'm going to copy this line, paste it below, because we can just adapt this code here in order to read in the performance data file. And so I'm going to change, as far as the naming goes, from personal data to performance data down here because, well, the other data file contains performance data. And the exact name of this data file, if I go to my working directory, is performance data with no space and a capital P and a capital D. Copy that, paste it in here, make sure I have that .csv extension after the exact file name, and make sure that's all within quotation marks. You can either highlight the whole line here or click somewhere on the line and click run. And now you see we have a second object here called performance data, all lowercase. You could again name whatever comes to the left-hand side of these arrows, you can name it whatever you'd like when you're assigning data to these objects to subsequently reference. And so if we click here on performance data, we can open it up here by viewing it. And we can see that this should look familiar. This is what was contained in that performance data file when we opened it in the Excel format, and you can see it replicated right here where we have ID perf underscore Q1 through Q4, so performance evaluation scores, let's say as rated by a supervisor from quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the year. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do, and I'm gonna make a note here, is we are going to horizontally merge the data frames. And note that this function will only allow you to merge 2 data frames at a time. Okay, so horizontally merge the data frames, and this is going to be called by default what's called an inner join or merge, which I'll explain in just a second once we can view the merged data frame. So just as we did when we read in data and used the left-handed arrow operator here to assign those data to an object that we can subsequently reference, we're going to do the same thing with the merge function. So let's come up with a name for the merge data frame object we're about to create. I'm going to be very generic here and call it merged df. Okay, so I'm calling it merged df for merge data frame. Not very creative, but you get the idea, and it's fairly self-explanatory. We use the left-handed arrow operator again so that whatever comes to the right of this, we can then assign to whatever comes to the left of it. So this is the object that we're going to be creating. It'll appear in our environment here in the upper right window pane. And so we're going to use the merge function from baseR, which is merge all lowercase, and this will allow us to do a horizontal merge. So I'm going to use a notation here from the function itself, and if you come down here and do to your console and you do a question mark and merge, the exact name of that function, and hit return or enter, you can get the help for this function. I'm going to use the same notation or argument notation that this function uses here, which is X and Y for the 2 data frame names, as this makes it a little bit easier and clearer when you're referencing which of the data frames is which if you add on some additional arguments. Okay, so let's go ahead and do X equals, and I'm going to call the X data frame in this case, which is sometimes referred to as the left data frame, and this will make more sense when I show you how to do a left join subsequently. If you do copy and paste in the first data frame that you'd like to merge, which is personal data, add a comma. This commas separate arguments within functions. And then now let's reference the y, or the right data frame. So y equals, let's copy the exact name of our second data frame object that we read in here. Okay, so this is our right, or our y data frame object. And add another comma. And then we're going to now use the by argument. And all of this can be found in the documentation here. If you look up any function and do the help for it, you can find all the documentation in terms of what it can do. And so you'll see that there is this by argument, so by equals here. And this is simply where we can set and specify what our key variable, which is sometimes called a matching variable, is. And this is how we're going to horizontally merge these two functions. So we need to put the key variable in quotation marks. Okay, so remember that the key variable goes in quotation marks. And if we remember up here, the key variable here, the matching variable, is the unique identifier, the ID variable, which is the employee ID variable here, which is lowercase I and D, okay, no space. And this is what's common to both of these data frames here. And this is how we can match, let's say, employee with ID number 153, we can match their performance data to the personal data. So we know 153 in the second data frame is Alejandro Sanchez, and so we can match their quarterly performance data. So it'll be added on here as extra variables, and so that row will match up here with Alejandro's data. Okay, so again, the exact name of that key variable here is ID, lowercase, and that'll vary by data frames. It could be whatever name that someone decided to call those variables, but in this case, it happens to be lowercase ID. And if we click run here, you'll see we get blue font down here, blue text in our console, which is usually a good sign. That means that everything worked just fine. And now what you'll see here is we have a new data frame object here, and it's called merge.df. And why is it called that? Well, that's what I happen to call it here to the left-hand side of this variable, or to the left-hand side of the left-hand arrow, when I was doing the data assignment or variable assignment here, so I could assign the resulting data frame that comes from this merge function to this object that I can subsequently reference. So if I were to click here and do the merge.df data frame, you will see that now we can view, and I'll open this all the way up here so it's a little bit clearer. Now you can see we've done a horizontal merge. So we've brought together these two data frames here, and we've matched the data by row by that key variable, which is our ID variable, and that's what we specified there. And you might notice something here though. So one, note that the cases are matched by ID variable. Okay, so the performance data for Isaac Newton lines up with Isaac Newton's name, start date, and gender, and so forth. But also note that the personal data frame object here has 8 cases or observations here. And note that the performance data frame has 6 cases or observations, but the merge data frame has 5 cases or observations here. Okay, and why has this happened? Well, this has happened because we did by default in what's called an inner join or an inner merge, which means that we retain only those match cases that have data in both data frames. And so this is again called an inner merge or an inner join. So this is the default for this is the default that you would typically do with the merge function. So you don't need to add any other arguments in order to do an inner join. This is what the function will do by default. Okay. And so it just means that if you didn't have a match, if one of the data frames only had data for, let's say, a person that doesn't have corresponding performance data in this data frame, that person would be dropped. That row would be dropped when we went to the merge. Okay, so that's what an inner merge is. Again, an inner merge is we retain only those match cases that have data in both data frames. Okay. All right, so the next thing I'm going to show you how to do is what's called a full merge or join. And so to do a full merge or join, I'm going to copy this and paste it down here. I am just going to overwrite the existing data frame object here. And to overwrite it, I just am going to assign what our new merge function here. I'm going to assign it to an object with the exact same name as that merge df data frame object. And so that will save it as that will overwrite the existing object with that same name. Okay. If you don't want to do this, then name this something unique. So name this some object that does not exist in your global environment currently, and then that way you don't overwrite any existing data frame objects. It really depends on the circumstance and what you're doing. In this case, there's really no need to create separate merge data frames to illustrate a full merge, an inner merge, a left merge that we'll eventually do, and a right merge. But so just want to point that out though in case you have different demands. So if we add an argument by adding a comma here and do all equals true, so this is a logical argument here, all equals true, this is going to retain all of the data, all of the case information, even if they don't have corresponding matches in the other data frame, okay? So we're going to retain all the data. And so watch what happens here if I click run. And then I go to our merge df object, which has now been overwritten with the new data. So now you can see we have 9 unique cases here, okay? And so this is an amalgamation of the 8 unique observations or cases from the personal data frame object and the 5 unique cases or observations from the performance data frame object. And so you can see where we don't have corresponding matches, we get missing data here, okay? So what this means is that there was someone with ID variable 125 that doesn't have their employee personal data in the data file, but they do have the quarterly performance data here. And so in R, by default, missing data cells are given NA, and so this indicates missing here. And then if we look at the flip side here, we can see that Ronald McDonald, John Smith, and Jane Smith, they had personal data variables here and data for those, last name, first name, start date, and gender, which was from our first data frame object, the personal data frame object, but they lacked the quarterly performance data here. And so you see those NAs or missing data cells here. So what we've done with this full merge or join is we've retained all the data, okay? All the available data. And it's really up to you whether or not you decide to do this. Sometimes I decide to go with full joins because often the analysis we run separately will allow us to decide how we want to treat missing data and so forth. But this would be one way to retain as many cases as possible. Okay, so quickly I'll show you how to do a left merge or join. And to do a left merge or join, I'm going to copy and paste the exact same code above. And this is where the specifying x equals personal and y equals performance. So specifying the x data frame, the y data frame, or the left and the right data frame comes in handy. Because if we tweak this argument a little bit and we do all.x equals true, we will be performing what's called a left merge. And it's called a left merge because you see here it's the x, which comes before y, so it's the left object here, data frame, more specifically, data frame object, that we are going to be retaining all of the cases for that object, even if there's not a corresponding match in the second data frame, which is our y data frame or our right data frame, okay? So I'm calling this the same object here, that we're assigning it to the same object, which is mergedf, so we're going to be overriding the existing data frame. Click run there. Click run there to run the whole line. And so let's click on this data frame object here. And so now what you'll see is we've retained all of the unique cases from our left data frame object, which was our x equals data frame object, which is our personal data frame object. So we have 8 observations, which matches what we originally had in the personal data frame object. So you can see 8 observations, okay? And then that means that we do keep people even if they had missing data for the variables that come from the second data frame object, which is our right data frame object. Okay, and then finally, let's finish up doing a right merge. And so to do a right merge, we're going to just tweak this last argument here. Instead of all.x, we're going to do all.y. And why is that? Well, y is our right data frame object here. So in this case, we're going to do the exact same thing we did with the left merge, except this time we're doing it with the write data frame object. We're calling it the exact same thing here in terms of the variable assignment or assigning the data to an object, merge df. And so that means we're going to overwrite the existing merge data frame object. Let's click run here to run that line of code. Click on the name of the data frame object in our global environment here. And so now see what happens is that we've retained all 6 observations from our write data frame object, which was our y equals performance data frame object here. And so what that means is that there was that one person with ID 125 that does not have data for their last name, first name, start date, or gender, which was from that left data frame object that we called x equals or specified using x equals. And so this is what happens when you do a write merge or a write join. So by default, the default works just fine. If you want to do an inner join, you don't need to add the extra argument here, which I've done for the full left and right joins or merges down here below. And this will work just fine for most purposes here as doing an inner join. But if you do need some more specialized kinds of horizontal merges, then feel free to use the full merge, the left merge, the right merge, or whatever makes the most sense given your circumstances. And often it's good to double check and put into your script. I'm going to make a note here to print the merged data frame object. Sometimes it's nice to just add this in at the end so we can print it to our console. I'm going to use the print function from base R here. It's print all lowercase. I'm just going to copy the exact name of our data frame object and paste it here. In this case, it's going to be referencing the most recent iteration of the merge df object, which, because this has been overwritten several times here, this is the one that included the left join here, or the right merge or the right join. So we click run there. You'll see another way we can view it is down here in our console. Okay. But if you only wanted to do a horizontal merge with, and by default, the inner join or the inner merge, I would just delete these other options if it were me, and just keep your script simplified where you read in the 2 data frames, you name these data frames, you do the inner join or the inner merge, and then you print it. And you can run it all from start to finish here to get everything back to where it was. And here's our inner merge data frame object printed to our console here. And as always, make sure that you save your data frame object so you can open it in another session or share it with other people. Thank you very much.